Hi. So I'm here on the disclosure sofa, and I'm here to talk a little bit about my experiences as an HIV negative man who uses PrEP. And certainly the context of this conversation is disclosure, so I thought I'd start off with describing my own experience of disclosing my HIV status and my safety practices. Certainly a couple of years ago, when PrEP was relatively new, that was quite a big deal, and I had the experience of not really knowing how to approach the conversation with somebody else, what I was trying to achieve in that conversation in terms of why I felt the need to disclose, and then also the fear of rejection, how that was going to be taken by somebody else when I say, hey, there's this thing that's associated with HIV and everything's going to be cool. Like, how do you have that conversation with somebody? The best advice is don't do that 30 seconds before you're going to have sex with them. That doesn't work too well. But if you're going to do that, then nowadays I've found it's very different in terms of my experience. It's very much a case of I can disclose my PrEP usage, which I often do quite simply on my online profile if I'm hooking up with guys on apps, which takes the conversation out of it in terms of the need to have a conversation, which I'm comfortable with having a conversation or not necessarily having a conversation depending upon what the other guy's mood is. That's all cool. What I've found is that when I've put my status, my HIV status and my usage of PrEP on the online profile, it's given the ability for other guys to come and have the conversation with me, and oftentimes I found people living with HIV that are managing an undetectable viral load will disclose their status to me. It might not be necessarily overt on their profile that that's their status, but they're happy to talk with me about that particular situation, and that's a real privilege. That means a lot to me, that ultimately I've created some kind of space whereby somebody feels comfortable without even having met me to be able to disclose their status to me, and hopefully I've given them the impression that that's comfortable and safe for them to do so. That's what I would like in return when I'm doing it, so I think it's the least that I could try to facilitate. It's interesting that with the advent of PrEP now, it's almost as if it has facilitated no longer a need to disclose. Certainly from my perspective, I don't necessarily feel quite so important, that the disclosure is not quite so important, but also having had the experience of understanding what it means to be on PrEP and understanding things like undetectable viral load as well, I'm no longer dependent or reliant upon somebody else disclosing. It's a case of somebody else's status is their business, and that doesn't matter to me whether they choose to disclose that to me or not. Not that I'm trying to shut down the conversation in that situation, but I recognise that that's a personal situation. And I also recognise that different states and territories around Australia have different laws about disclosure, which is a little unfair, to be honest. But certainly I live in the state of Victoria, and I don't believe it's necessary for people living with HIV to disclose their status before having sex, which is, sure, that's a great thing, because ultimately we now know that undetectable equals untransmittable, so it's all good. That's fine. In fact, I think the statistics say that is even safer than PrEP, so yeah, all good. And I think really where we are now with understanding the undetectable equals untransmittable message, as well as the science behind PrEP, it really leads me to conclude that as somebody using PrEP, when I interact with somebody who's living with HIV and taking antiretroviral medication, we're both pretty much the same. We're both using antiretroviral medication to manage HIV. One of us lives without HIV and one of us does, but besides that, we're equal.